Hi there and welcome to 99 Yards American Football for UK fans. As the college football season has now officially ended, we thought it would be interesting to hold a special podcast dedicated to the 2018 college season. I'm your host, George Somerville, and this week I'm joined by fellow 99 Yards college writers Ollie Hodgkinson and Alex Ginnery. Hi guys, how are you both? Are you well?
Yeah, good. Thanks, George. Thanks for having us on.
Yeah, really good. Can't wait to get involved, get stuck in.
In this week's episode, we'll be talking about the National Championship game, surprises from this season, our chosen player of the year, value for money draft picks, and the college football playoff format. But first, a story which has been circulating for a few weeks now but seemed to get a lot of attention today was Kyler Murray potentially making himself eligible for the NFL draft. Given he's already been drafted to play baseball for the Oakland A's, this is potentially huge news. What are your thoughts on this, guys?
So huge. I think huge news is the right way of putting it. If you're a general manager or a head coach or even just a fan of a team that needs a quarterback in this year's draft, if you can get Kyler Murray in there, it's changed the whole face of the draft for a lot of these quarterback needy teams. Just a couple of weeks ago, we were looking at a draft that there wasn't really a first round talent in the draft. There was probably a quarterback in Justin Herbert that might go in the first round just out of necessity rather than talent. He obviously is going back to Oregon for next year. But then in the last 2 weeks, you've had Dwayne Haskins commit, and then it looks like Kyler Murray's going to commit as well. So the two big names that really have changed the landscape of the draft this year. So yeah, huge news as far as I'm concerned.
I think for me, the real change in things was when someone like Matt Miller, who works at Bleacher Report, came out and said the executives he'd been talking to were telling him that Murray was a first-round pick. I think the minute that happened, the idea of playing baseball was over. Football was always in his game. It's why he took this extra year at Oklahoma to come back and play. And being a first-round pick at quarterback, someone that could go out there and actually make a success of it in the league and be a successful quarterback is probably the biggest position in sport. And so I'm really not surprised that he's making this decision now if he is going to be a first-round pick come the draft this year.
It is going to be really interesting because he's contracted to the A's. He's been paid some money, and I think coincidentally the start of the spring training is very close to or coincides with the NFL Combine. So the news today was suggesting that the A's weren't overly bothered about this news. But clearly, the closer they get to the Combine, I would think that they'll get particularly nervous. And the one thing, I mean, there's been a lot of chat today about the money aspect of it. But I read on CBS that apparently, if he was to declare for the NFL draft and then go into the Combine and get drafted, the Oakland A's would not get a compensatory pick. So to me, that's got lawsuit written all over it.
I think talking about money, obviously, and what Alex was saying about Matt Miller, obviously Cliff Kingsbury's been appointed at Arizona. They hold the number one overall pick in the draft, and it's only 2 months back since he was reported as saying if he had the first pick in the draft, he'd take Kyler Murray with it. Whether that's part of his thinking, who knows, but it's certainly an interesting thing to investigate and to have a look at there.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of baseball teams are used to this with drafting NFL prospects and then them going into the NFL draft. I mean, Russell Wilson was one, but there's never been one drafted as high as Kyler Murray will potentially be drafted in this year's NFL draft, who already had a baseball contract. Baseball, the system, the amount of prospects that they take on board and the hit rate on those prospects make it not that big a deal to lose one. But when you lose one that you picked in the first round, it is going to have an effect. And as you say, I can see there being some issues from the A's coming down the pipe.
It certainly will be fascinating to see how this plays out, especially the closer it gets to mid-February. But now on to the college season itself. Monday night saw the finale of the college football season with the national championship game between Alabama and Clemson. For those on this side of the pond, many woke up to find a scoreline which shocked most. What was your take on the game, guys? And was it really a shock?
I think the scoreline was a shock. I don't think many people saw Clemson winning 44-16. I don't think the result was a shock. For myself, I thought Clemson would win. We did an article on their defensive line versus the Alabama O-line, and I could see some real keys to the game there as to where Clemson could make an impact on Alabama. I thought it was a fascinating game, an amazing first quarter. I had planned on watching the first quarter and maybe going to sleep and catching the rest in the morning, and I couldn't go to bed. It was a fascinating game. It's an exciting game. So as far as shocks goes, the scoreline, yes. The result, no.
Yeah, I somewhat agree. I definitely thought going into it that Clemson could win. There's so much talent on that team and so many young, talented players, and I thought that was going to be their undoing. Someone like Trevor Lawrence had never experienced that situation before, whereas Tua had for Alabama. And I thought that going into it, it would be Trevor Lawrence would be the one to fade. And the shock for me was that Tua was the quarterback who didn't play very well in the game. I thought he lost all his poise in the pocket, the poise that's been there all year and has made him so dangerous at quarterback for Alabama. And I don't think the play calling did him any favours, but the performance was not one we've been used to seeing from Tua. And personally, I think his draft stock for next year's draft, looking a long way ahead, will have taken a hit from this performance because it's the closest thing we're going to see him playing to an NFL game. And he really looked out of sorts and looked like he didn't belong.
Yeah, it was quite amazing watching it. You're absolutely right, because Trevor Lawrence has only made 11 starts for his entire Clemson career, and you're right. I think when you looked at the first play of the game where Tua threw the pick six, and then in the second play, through whatever the yardage was for the touchdown, and then Trevor Lawrence went through just a little bit of a 10-minute phase where it wasn't clicking for him, and they weren't really making any progress. And then, I still find it, it's all, if I'm honest, a little bit of a blur for me that the game then changed very, very quickly. And you're right, Alex. What the Clemson defense managed to do was really kind of play mind games with Tagovailoa, and he looked a totally different person. And if you wind the clock back 12 months, when he came on and devastated that Georgia side, he looked a shadow of the guy that we've seen this year. So it was a really strange thing to happen, and I agree with both of you. Clemson, who are a very talented side, just strode away from Alabama and showed how good they are.
Yeah, I think going back to Lawrence and Tua, there was two plays in the second half, very similar plays for each team, where just the poise and the recognition of what was going on and their ability to quickly analyse the play, the difference between the two. Tua took the sack. Lawrence, although not on completion, managed to get the ball away pretty quickly. It was nearly completed. And just in those two plays, very similar screenplays, but handled very, very differently. And I think that kind of encapsulated the game right there in those two plays.
I agree, and I do think that the amount of real draft eligible and future NFL talent on these two teams was a sight to behold, mainly because of the difference in scoreline. Alabama's future NFL players, of which these guys will still get drafted, and they'll still get drafted very highly because they're very talented players that just been outplayed in one game, but they didn't turn up for this game. Jonah Williams has been the best left tackle in college. He's a consensus top 10 pick in the NFL draft this year, but he was completely outplayed by Cleveland Ferrell, and he just had no answer to him all game.
Yeah, one of the things that surprised me was just how negated the Alabama running game was, which has been very dominant this year, and they've got four exceptional running backs, and they've and they switched them about, so much so that Damien Harris's numbers are very poor this year because he's been largely saved for the big games. And aside from the first quarter, we never really saw him much beyond that. But the same cannot be said from the Clemson side of things, where when their defence stood up and negated that running game, but also the Clemson running game came to the fore and drove Alabama back. So there was a very, very strong display from Clemson, and I think begrudgingly very worthy winners of the championship. I'm sure it's a game that will be discussed and debated for quite some time to go. But now that the season is done and dusted, we get the chance to look back and review the good, the bad, and the ugly from 2018. Guys, who have what stood out in a good or a bad way for you this year? Who surpassed the expectations and who disappointed?
To start off, for me, someone who surpassed my expectations was Josh Allen, the edge rusher at Kentucky. He put that team on his back this year. I mean, he went back to school last year. He could have come out into the NFL draft and been a sort of pick maybe in the top 2 rounds. He probably would have snuck into the first round given the lack of edge talent last year. And he decided to go back to school. He took a bit of a gamble on himself and that he would have a really, really good senior year. And he did. He came out, he put up huge numbers in the SEC, which is not an easy place to get noticed if you're not playing for Alabama, for Georgia, for Florida, for LSU, for one of these big powerhouse schools. And he took Kentucky all the way to a New Year's Six bowl game this year. Yeah, and he was the lifeblood of that team. He's got elite bend, elite dip off the edge. He's a player I love to watch play. Really is.
Yeah, I think he's a great player, and I think it'd be interesting to see where he goes in the draft because his stock has just risen this year, and particularly given that he was not a 5-star recruit by any stretch of the imagination. I think he was a 3-star recruit, so he's done incredibly well. And for me, I'm going to dwell on the disappointing. It's really hard to say it's been a disappointing season when you've had a winning season, but Wisconsin and Michigan and Washington and Miami all had winning seasons, but I can't help but think that we expected a whole lot more from them. A Wisconsin team where almost all of their seniors returned, so on the offense and the defense, they were heavily stacked with seniors, all of whom will go into the NFL draft, and they just an 8-5 season I think has to be a very disappointing return for the Wisconsin fans, because I thought the year before they got pretty close to being a top 4 team, didn't quite make it. I think everyone thought they were going to. I certainly thought they were going to be chasing a top 4 space, and actually they were well off the pace. Michigan had a 10-3 season, and I thought at one point looking, I thought they had secured a 4th spot, but I think that last game against Ohio State, and it's hard to say that was a disappointing season for them, but Michigan fans must have felt particularly hard done to, having had the season that they had, to lose out to their arch enemies, Ohio State, and then drop out of the top 4. But I guess a bowl game probably was kind of scant consolation for them. And poor old Miami, who then had the ignominy of Mark Richt resigning or retiring at the end of the season. That was a terrible year for them, a 7-6 season, when everybody thought that Miami was back and going to be very dominant, but they were a very poor side this year.
Yeah, I have to agree with you on Miami, George. For me, they going 7-6, going unranked, 4-4 in their conference as well. When they'd been 10-3 last season, started the season really highly ranked as well. So for them to have the performance they did, I thought was really disappointing. FSU as well, absolutely terrible season for them. First losing season since 1976, I believe, and the first time they've not been to a bowl game since 1982. So Really disappointing season for them. On the positive side, Purdue beating Ohio State. For me, I stayed up all night and watched that game. Just the excitement of the game, the surprise, and obviously at the time in front of Tyler Trent, I thought the passion and just everything behind that game was everything that you want to see in a sporting occasion. So for me, that was the sort of standout good point of the season. Going as far back as week 5, I think it was, Old Dominion beating Virginia Tech. Big shock there. That's one of the first games I wrote about for 99 yards, and they won 49-35 against the ranked Virginia Tech team at the time. Was like a massive shock. So that was something for me as a standout moment of the season.
I mean, coming back in, another team who I was really impressed with this year, and I've been following sort of since their program was reinstated a couple of years ago, is UAB down in Conference USA. And I mean, it's a group of 5 school. They don't get the same press that the Power 5 schools get, but from having their program stopped, their program taken away, to then having it reinstated and being in their second year, coming back, winning a conference championship, going to a bowl game, winning the bowl game. It was just a fairy tale ending to a year that really should have been another building year. They've had 2 years of building this program from scratch, using transfers and walk-ons, and they've managed to come together and win the conference championship, win the bowl game, and have another fantastic season.
Yeah, I agree. That was a real fairy tale ending to their season for a team that's really been out of action for so much time. And you're right, Ollie. The Florida State situation has been largely overlooked for all the other things that are being on in the college game just now. But Willie Taggart's first season at Florida State has not been impressive at all, and that's the longest streak in college football. They've been bowl eligible for all those years, and I wouldn't like to be a coach who loses that streak in my first season, and I'm not sure where Florida State go from here, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about coaches that are on the hot seat, and I think surely Willie Taggart's on one of the hotter ones. We talk about it being his first season there, but when you lose a streak like that, that's quite a thing to have hanging over your head. If they have a poor start next season, then that very quickly escalates into something else, doesn't it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's really interesting points there. It's fun to look back and see who started the year as unfancied but finished well, and those favourites that flopped. Still looking back at 2018, who is your player and your coach of the year?
So for me, I know Alex has already touched on him, but we talk about the players like Kyler Murray, the players like Tua, the real offensive stars that college football and the NFL these days really have as their poster boys for the league. But the defensive players, especially for this draft, are just standing out. And Josh Allen, for me, like Alex said, he's transformed the University of Kentucky. They're not where they are without him. So for me, he was my player of the year. Coach-wise, you look at Tom Herman at Texas. They went 7-6 last year, but 10-3 season this season. Beating Georgia in the Sugar Bowl. The Red River rivalry games with Oklahoma, those 2 games were fantastic games. The play of Sam Ehlinger as well really stood out for me this year. So I'm going with Tom Herman down at Texas.
I mean, that's a fantastic link to my player of the year, because when we talk about college football quarterbacks, and you hear about Kyler Murray, about Tua, about Trevor Lawrence and Jake Fromm, Georgia, but my player of the year is someone who does more than those quarterbacks. He does everything. He's an all-round player at the quarterback position, and it is Sam Ehlinger. This is a guy who can throw it deep to his receivers, who can put the ball on a plate for over the middle of the field, but who also, when they're 2 yards out, or they need 2 yards to get a touchdown, or 2 yards to get a crucial first down, will take the ball, who run the quarterback power straight up the gut, straight between the tackles, into the defensive lineman, and will pick up first downs and touchdowns. He's a big guy. He's a bad dude, and he is going to bring Texas back to national prominence. Now, for Coach of the Year, I've already touched on UAB, and I don't think any coach has done as much with as little as Bill Clark has done with that program. And he should win the Coach of the Year award every year that he's there and winning games, because to bring that program back to where it is a fantastic achievement. And there is no better coaching achievement, I don't think, across the country, across college sports this year.
I'm glad that we managed to bring Texas into the conversation, because I was almost going to bring Texas up in the last segment, because it's become a standing joke over the last couple of years. Texas is back, and no, they're not. But I tell you what, you're right, Alex. I think Texas are back, and Ollie was bang on with Tom Herman. He came with such a great pedigree from Houston. He had a difficult first season where it was a little bit back and forward, but Sam Ehlinger has been fantastic. And I wrote a little bit about this on the Sugar Bowl on the 99 Yard website, and I compared him, and not just me, sorry, lots of people are comparing him to Tim Tebow, and I'm sure for anyone out there who's an NFL fan, they probably kind of have a snigger at that. But actually, to watch Tim Tebow in his prime for Florida, you can see where the comparisons lie, because Sam Ehlinger is such a dynamic player. But the upside to Ehlinger is, and Alex touched on it, his arm is like a rocket, and he's a fantastic passer of the ball. So I think it's going to be really exciting to see what Texas do next year. And just touching on the Coach of the Year, another team that I think are going to be really exciting team next year, particularly if they sort out the quarterback position, is Florida, because I think Dan Mullins has done an exceptional job at Gainesville this year. They had a very good season after a shaky start, I have to say, but really rallied and became a very strong candidate towards the end. And if they'd made their run a little bit earlier, I'm not saying that they would have gotten at the top four, but they wouldn't have been far away from it. They would have been, they would have been a Sugar Bowl candidate. So I think Dan Mullins at Florida has done a great job this year. Okay, guys, thanks. Let's have a look at next season now. A question for Ollie first. Which team will surprise us next year or potentially break into the Final Four?
Anyone listening is probably going to think we're all Texas fans. We've all got together to arrange a Big Up Texas podcast. But for me, it's one of two teams who will creep into the top four. They're not a massive surprise. I'm not saying anyone's coming from the back end of the top 25 all the way up to the four. But for me, between Texas and Georgia, one of those two teams I think will be in the top four that missed out on it this year for sure. They were close. I think one of those two make it in. Georgia, they return a lot of their defensive starters. They return Jake Fromm. They've got a number of 5-star recruits out of this year's early signing period and ones that had already committed. So I see Georgia being really strong. The only knock on them is how Jake Fromm performs without the backup of Justin Fields coming in for some of the gimmick plays that they run at Georgia. But I think Georgia will be really strong. And I think Texas too. Again, we spoke about Sam Ehlinger. They've 14 4-star recruits already. And I think they've made a good run this season. Why can't they make a good run at it next season? They were very close, both of those two teams.
Alex, you have a firm grip on draft prospects for 2019. We all know the big names likely to go in the first round, but which players will provide real value for their draft pick, either later in round one or in subsequent rounds?
Yeah, so I've got a couple of names. Really, I really like the look of watching them play. I think someone who's rising up draft boards very quickly coming from quite a lowly position because he's part of that Alabama stable of running backs that you mentioned earlier, is Josh Jacobs. He's a real talent, and he could end up being running back 1 in this draft. Now, a lot of people don't think there's a running back worth taking in the first round. Positional need really usually skews it away unless you have a generational talent like Saquon Barkley. But I think if you can pick up Josh Jacobs, if you need a running back, you can pick him up at the end of the first round. It's a really, really good pick because he's going to be making noise on Sundays from next year. Next up is a defensive back out of Florida who makes plays in big moments. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson is probably going to end up playing as a nickel corner at the next level because his talent, he's lacking some of the skills of a real outside shutdown corner. But what he does is pop up over in the middle of the field at key moments to make big plays. The bowl game against Michigan, he picked off a Shea Patterson deep pass. I think it was in the second quarter. It was maybe just before halftime that completely flipped that game. It was a really close game at that point. He makes the pick, probably 10 meters out from his own end zone, returns it another 40 on top. Florida go down and score before halftime, and the game is completely over from there. They go and they blow out Michigan and heap pressure on John Harbaugh, in my opinion.
I love the Josh Jacobs pick because he's a real fairy tale story in amongst a team of 5-star recruits, because Josh Jacobs came in as a 3-star recruit, which is not often heard of in Tuscaloosa. He comes from a very difficult background in a very rough part of somewhere up north of Illinois, I think. And he's got a huge amount of drive to push him forward. And you're right, in that stable of quarterbacks that who are all stars, he really has shone through. His numbers are just absolutely incredible. So I think you're right. I think he's got a real NFL career ahead of him. One name that jumped out at me a little bit when I was looking through some mock drafts, which are not worth the paper they're written on at this moment in time, I have to say, but Noah Fant, the tight end out of Iowa, seems to have dropped right down draft boards. And for anyone who hasn't read our way too soon mock draft, which we did way too soon back in November, I think, albeit our draft was about positional need, we had Noah Fant going in the first round. Now, that may not be the case, but to see him fall so far off far down the board does suggest to me that there's a little bit of value for money if you pick him up quite far down. And the other, but just back on the running back topic, which I have to say kind of amazes me a little bit. The running back situation this year is actually quite full, but Alex rightly points out that it's unlikely that most of these guys are going to go, or any of these guys are going to go in the first round. But you've got Benny Snell in there, who we've talked a lot about Josh Allen, but Benny Snell's been another real success story at Kentucky. Damien Harris out of Alabama, who's I mentioned earlier on, who's had a quiet season but is running on fresh legs and fully fit. And Bryce Love at Stanford, who just a season ago was in the running for the Heisman, but has disappeared off the face of the earth, mostly because he's had a couple of bad knee injuries, but still an amazing talent in there that I think would, I've seen him in mock drafts going as low as the third or the fourth round, where I think you could pick up some real value at that point.
For me, for Bryce Love, the combine is going to be huge, not because of how he runs or how he performs in the drills, but the medical checks that they do at the combine that only go to NFL teams. No one gets to see those. Obviously, the insiders will get word of mouth passed across to them. But if they come back good, Bryce Love is probably a second round back. But if they come back bad, then he could easily go undrafted, because they are, with the knee injury history, that's going to be key. On the tight ends, on Noah Fant, he's been playing with TJ Hawkinson at Iowa. The two of them are in there in the tight end room together. They're both in this draft. They're both quality players, but being the offense that Iowa runs, it suited Hawkinson a little bit more than it suited Fant. Hawkinson's got the tape. Fant's probably got more upside. They're both stellar picks at tight end in what is a really, really deep tight end class this year.
Yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to throw one name into both of you to see what you think about it. In a lot of mock drafts before, there's been a lot of debate about quarterbacks, and we talked about Justin Herbert, Oregon, who was the pick to, if anyone was going to go in the first round, it would be him. But another name that's been touted about just now is Ryan Finley, who's the quarterback at NC State. And the interesting thing about Ryan Finley is that I think he's 25 because he's gone back to university. He's done his second degree. I've watched NC State this year. They were a very talented side, albeit they had a disappointing end to the season. If you were an NFL scout, would you be looking at Ryan Finley or would you disregard him?
For me, I think there's a number of quarterbacks who are very much of a similar talent level, who may get taken higher than they should do, just because there's a lot of teams that need quarterbacks. You've mentioned Ryan Finley. There's Drew Lock. There is Daniel Jones, Will Grier. When we did our mock draft, I picked Will Grier at 5 for the Giants, just based on the fact that the Giants need a quarterback. And I was more sold on Grier than I was on Herbert. Herbert has had a lot of talk about him. Obviously, it's irrelevant now, but for me, I thought at that time Grier was a better prospect than Herbert anyway. So I think a number of quarterbacks, very similar levels of talent, that may find themselves going slightly higher than maybe they deserve to.
Yeah, for these guys, there's 8 senior quarterbacks that are in that kind of range that Ollie was talking about. There's a week, a college all-star game called the Senior Bowl. It's the same week as the Pro Bowl for NFL all-star games. It's only senior players and juniors who have graduated early can go to this game. They get invited down, and the two teams are coached by NFL coaching squads. So one side this year it's John Gruden and the Raiders. On the other side it's Kyle Shanahan and the Niners. So these quarterbacks get a chance to sit down and work with two coaches really famous for working with quarterbacks and getting the best out of them. How they perform that week with all scouts from all teams, personnel executives from all teams down there watching them will be key to where they go in the draft. And it will provide a big shake-up to the QB class at this draft. Last year, Baker Mayfield went down there and really nailed the process. Yeah, he made a lot of friends in that week. He was already creeping into the bottom end of the first round, but that's what really started his rise up to becoming the number one pick, was the way he put in, the performances he put in, the meetings he had at this week down in Mobile in Alabama at the Senior Bowl. So the week post Senior Bowl, seeing all the coverage that these quarterbacks get, you'll know a lot more, I think, about just quite how good this quarterback class is. There's been a lot spoken about it, but things will definitely change between now and the draft, and the Senior Bowl is a real big catalyst for that change.
Thanks for that, guys. It'll be interesting to see how well your crystal ball works and see if we recognise any of these names on a Sunday. For our final section, there's been a lot of debate on the format of the college football playoff system. Firstly, do you think the committee selected the best Final Four teams?
For me, Clemson, yes. Alabama, yes. Oklahoma, yes. And Notre Dame, by the fact they won every game they played, I think they deserve to be in the Final Four. I watched a couple of their games. They did play well. The thing this year was there was teams from sort of 4 to 8 to 9 who all could make a case. They were all beating each other, and Notre Dame didn't have that problem. So I think they got the Final Four right. They could have just gone with the Final Two though. Clemson and Alabama, they 1 and 2. They could have quite easily just had them two without a Final Four.
Yeah, I agree. It was almost 4 was almost too many this year. And now I agree. I think there should be 4 teams, because if there was only 2 and unbeaten Notre Dame didn't get a chance, then people would have been talking about how could a team go unbeaten and not get a shot to win a national title. I think it was the right 4 teams. As I say, Oklahoma they avenged their loss to Texas. Yeah, they had one loss on their resume. They avenged that by beating them again in the Big 12 championship game. Ohio State got blown out by Purdue. Texas was a top 25 team. It was a top 10 team, I think it ended the year. It wasn't Purdue. That result was always going to make it tough for Ohio State if there were 3 unbeaten teams at the end of the season, and they just missed out. And I think that was about fair.
Yeah, and we talked before about it's about the quality of loss, and people say, is it better to lose at the start of the season at the end of the season? I certainly think if you get beat at the end of the season, it can be a nail in the coffin. But the one thing you don't do is you don't get beat to Purdue, right? So it's about the quality of the loss, and you can see how some teams had progressed through the year. Michigan were one of those teams who just got better and better as they got on in the team, but then they fell at the final hurdle. But if they'd beaten Ohio State, they would have been in the Final Four. So I guess that then begs the question that there's been such a huge amount of debate from when we went from the original system or the last system, where the algorithm and some voters kind of voted who the playoff would be between. There's been a lot of chat this season about moving it from 4 to more. Should the playoff format change to an 8, a 16, or even a 24-team playoff?
I mean, you can see the arguments from a lot of teams for an expansion. UCF obviously being the case in point for the last 2 seasons. They've made a real strong case for a playoff expansion to at least 8 teams. For me, I like the Final Four. I like how it all works. Like I said, I think the Final 2 would have been sufficient this year. The 1 and 2 teams, the 2 clearly best teams in the country, playing in a championship game. I don't see any problem with that. What Alex did do earlier in the season was a format for an 8-team playoff, which I thought was a fantastic read and a good way of doing it. I don't know if you want to elaborate on that for us, Alex.
Yeah, so for me, 8 teams works best, because that way you can put your 5 conference champs in from your Power 5 conferences, and then you give a spot to the best group of 5 team, which would have been UCF this year, and then you have 2 at-large bids. So this year, Notre Dame goes unbeaten, it gets in. If Notre Dame has a loss, it probably doesn't get in, but that's its own fault for being an independent school. If it wants to get in, it can join a conference. Now, the reason I don't see it going any bigger than 8 is because all these conferences have conference championship games. So you don't need an extra round of games, because you have it there on championship weekend where you play to get in. But say you're Georgia and you've got to go up against Alabama in the SEC championship game, you have one loss, you're easily one of the best 8 teams in the country. You still get another chance to come in and play, but you're going to have to go to the number 1 or the number 2 ranked team in the nation. What this will also do is if each conference has a chance to play off for the national championship, if you go on and win it, it pushes players to the unfavored Power 5 conferences. So top players will go out to Pac-12 schools because they know that they will have a good chance of getting a spot in the college football playoff. If you're a 5-star quarterback and you go down to the SEC with defensive talent against teams like Alabama and Georgia and all these LSU, these top level defensive teams, or you could go to the Pac-12 where you're on the West Coast. It's decent weather in most of the places. You enjoy your quality of life, and you get the shot at winning the national championship on top of that. Then you're going to go to the Pac-12 where you've got a little bit of an easier shot. And I think it just balances everything out a little bit more. No one can say they're being excluded because everyone's got a chance to win. And if you were to go a little bit deeper with it, like I did in the post, you could even keep the same New Year's Six bowls as your 4 quarterfinals and 2 semifinals, and keep the traditional play-ins to make sure that the Rose Bowl is still Big Ten versus Pac-12, or the Sugar Bowl is still SEC versus Big 12. It's a system to me that makes too much sense, which is why they're not doing it.
which is very true, right? And I think you made a valid point there about you still have to have the divisional playoffs and maintain them and keep them relevant, because where it would have been slightly disappointing this year would have been, again, for Georgia to get into the Final Four after having played the divisional playoff against Alabama. Obviously, Georgia would then have been ranked higher, but effectively, we'd have had 2 games against the same sides within a couple of weeks of each other, which from a spectacle, forgetting all about the ranking, because a lot of this is about spectacle. Let's be honest, everybody wanted to see Alabama versus Oklahoma. I'm not sure everybody wanted to see another match against Alabama and Georgia. So it's about maintaining that. But you're right, Alex. The chances of common sense winning through are probably few and far between. This is just one of those subjects that provokes great debate, and I'm sure is going to rumble on, and we'll have the same debate, I have no doubt, next year. Well, that's all for this week's show, and I hope you enjoyed our college football special. As always, we'd love to hear your thoughts on the topics we discussed, and of course, any feedback you may have. You can tweet us at 99 yards. And if you're a regular listener and enjoy our show, we'd love you to leave us a star review via Apple Podcasts or the provider you're listening to us through. Thanks for listening.